Hello and welcome to the first screencast in a series on CQRS and event sourcing in PHP. My name is Simon Bennett and I'm the lead developer at a company in the UK called HotSnapper. In my free time I offer consultancy for CQRS and event sourcing. I have a little organisation called SmoothPHP where anyone can pick up some packages for getting started. We have a laravel one, adapter, and a Symfony adapter, that one's in progress, that enable developers to quickly implement CQRS into any project. The reason I created my own packages was because I was using CQRS. Before I was using Broadway and a bit of a sort of adaptation to get to do what I really wanted, and it made more sense for me to build my own. The SmoothPHP packages I have in production on about 3 or 4, must be about 4 different applications, so I know that it works well. And in an effort to promote it, we need sort of better documentation, and Screencast seems like the right way to go. So in this first screencast I'm going to be just talking about the setup. I'm going to pick Laravel as my framework, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So the first thing we need to do is set up a development environment. Now what I recommend and what I do and what we do at work is we have a virtual machine per project. It works really nicely. So when it comes to doing CQRS and event sourcing, you need a few packages in that are slightly different to what you'd have as a minimum stack. We need some queue handling and like a caching layer system. So I recommend using this website, not quite sure how you pronounce it properly, to build virtual machines. So we'll build a new one. For this tutorial series I'm going to be doing a project that I started ages ago and let die, called You Need a Cable. It's very simple. It's not really going to model a domain correctly, but it will show how to model a domain. It's not complicated, and I suppose in some respects that helps, and in some respects it will be well over-engineered with event sourcing. Anyway, the website allows you to easily search for a cable saying I need a male HDMI to female DVI, or vice versa, making it very easy for users to search cables. It worked well before, but I didn't build in any system to automate it, so I was having to do it manually, and it sort of fell into disrepair. But it was working quite nicely in terms of affiliate program. So I thought we would just use this screencast to start rebuilding that, and I'll make it all open source because I'm not really bothered about sort of that losing it. So anyway, back to building the local VM. I'm sure some of you have used this before. I now pick Ubuntu because of PHP 7 support. An IP address, I'm not entirely sure what's free for me, so I'll leave that for now. You need a cable.local. That's all we need: memory and CPU. NFS, system packages, don't need them. Firewall rules, cron jobs. We might as well set up cron with Laravel. Laravel has a pretty nice method, so we'll call this Laravel vel www-data command. I've just copied this, so that will be var www. Environment variables, won't be any, we'll just do every minute. Custom files, won't worry about that. Nginx, always use Nginx. You need a cable.local, and we will do the www. Just for testing, and that will be public. Enable SSL. Always good to have SSL in for local dev. Apache, don't need Apache. PHP 7. Now what was there? We need Xdebug. So list of packages. Don't add mcrypt in here. That causes problems. So we need curl. I think I'm going to need GD for some image manipulation. Oh, and might as well put image magic in as well. What else is it suggesting? yeah, don't need any of those things. Right, so that's fine. Xdebug is enough for now. Ruby, ignore, Python, ignore, Node.js. Bit useful if we want to compile some assets, but different thing. Right, back. I've started now using MariaDB as a default. When you set up a CQRS package, it's better to have two databases, I found. One with your events store in, and one with where you put your projections. That way they are separated, and there's no sort of risk between them. You don't want to be running any sort of laravel migrations anywhere near your event store, because that's permanent and you wouldn't want to lose that. So we'll keep it as DB user because that's fine. DB name we'll just change to YNAC, and we'll add another table, and we will just call this event store. We'll allow DB user to connect to them all. I don't like to change this just to keep life easier. Don't need any of these. We do install Redis. Redis is used for queuing. That's the Laravel queuing system, so it works quite well. There are obviously Beanstalk and stuff like that, but I found Redis just seems a bit simpler, really. You're free to choose what you like. Mailhog, why not? It's a pretty good package. Elasticsearch, you don't need Elasticsearch, but because I'm building a catalog system, I probably will need Elasticsearch. Right, and we'll create our archive and download. Okay, so in a few minutes we'll come back, or I'll come back, and I'll show you setting up the Laravel application. What I normally do is I put a source folder in the application, and this is where I put all the domain code for the software, and keep Laravel stuff very separate. Keep Laravel stuff in the app folder, and keep the domain stuff in the source folder. The source folder has the domain, and Laravel in the app folder plugs into the domain and depends on the domain, but the domain has no dependencies on Laravel or any other sort of framework. This way you sort of keep the architecture very clean. At the end of the day, you're not tied into Laravel or whatever sort of HTTP setup you've got going. You keep there sort of a barrier, and all the dependencies go into the domain. Anyway, so we've got that source folder. So anyway, we'll go back into the application and we will name it. So you need cable. That's going to be a nightmare of an interface. Application. So that's what I normally do. I set the application folder to be you need a cable application, and then the source folder just maps to you need a cable. I tried Laravel in the past, and I wasn't too keen on that sort of terminology. So if we go into PHP Storm and look in our composer folder, we will see that we now have PSR4 auto loading for our application folder, and everything in here will be you need a cable application. So we will basically copy this line and just have the you need a cable in the source folder. Job's a good one. And I suppose from here we'll just do a composer dump auto load. If you forget to do that, it's a nightmare, and you can't work out why nothing's working. Right then, the next thing really is to hook in the service provider required for the CQRS library. So if we go into the app.php in the config folder, and we need to add a service provider which we provide, so it'll be, let's see if I can just find it. There we go, and we don't need that. So that's the SmoothPHP Laravel adapter service provider. In here we have all the magic that hooks in the application, hooks in all the interfaces that the main package has. At this point, if we were to run PHP Artisan, we will see a list of smooth commands. but we will also do PHP Artisan vendor publish, and we will publish the CQRS event sourcing config, which is now in here. There are a few settings in here that you can fiddle around with. You can fiddle around with the event store connection. This goes off the database.db. You can also fiddle around with the event store table. Tend to default it to event store. Me and my associate Jordan were playing around with, when you swap branches, swapping the event store table to make development easier, really. So you can keep the events on one branch different to the events on a different branch. So that's something you can do here by using an environment variable. We say we do want to use the command bus and our serializer and our event dispatcher and event bus, and we have some sort of pre and after commands for replaying events. Down here we have some generators, but which arrange sort of new, and that's what's holding back the package. We'll be doing a little bit more work on here, but I won't be covering that now. So I think in terms of that, we're okay. The next thing will be setting up the database connection. Back. In the time we've been out, I've set up SQL Pro to talk to the database. Unfortunately, I did just record this like half an hour ago, but I had my microphone set up wrong and didn't record the audio. So unfortunately, I've already done some of this, and I can't really be bothered to roll it all back. So I'm just going to run through what I did, and we can sort of go through this way. So the first thing I did was I set up an additional database connection environment variables for the event store. As we know, when we set up the virtual machine, we had two databases, an event store and a YNAC. Same user on both, both on localhost, but just different databases. So I've set up the .env file for them. Then in the databases file, I created a new connection called event store that uses these new environment variables. Store MySQL, which is all fine and dandy. And then in the CQRS configuration folder, or configuration file, I mean, the connection is defaulted to event store. So that has now hooked up the event store table or database connection. So as soon as you've done that, you need to run a command on the CQRS package, and it's this one here, SmoothPHP build event store. You can see I've just run it here. Would you like to build the new database, the new table on the event store database? Yes. And what this does is it goes into your event store database using the connection you provided and builds this new table called event store. It's a very simple table, which is sort of one of the beautiful natures of using event sourcing. The first column is just an auto increment ID, not particularly relevant or used. We then have a unique ID, which represents the unique ID of your aggregate. I tend to prefix them with the aggregate type, so member dash, then the unique ID, or user dash, or cable dash, something along those lines. The playhead then is an integer which represents which version that event is on the aggregate. It's very important to have this, and it prevents eventual consistency errors or just sort of integrity errors. So two events can't apply onto an aggregate on the same playhead version. So we rely on MySQL having a unique key on the UID and the playhead to make sure that we're not running into any sort of inconsistencies with sort of business logic. The next column is metadata, which isn't currently used but can be used to store extra information, your deserializer information or anything of that nature. Something you can do is store the command information in the metadata to see how it relates to the event. Useful for sort of debugging and such, or not debugging, but storing additional data not relevant necessarily to the business event or domain event. Then we have the payload, which has the domain event information. It's JSON encoded. You get your event class and you serialize it into JSON. Then we have recorded on, which is just a timestamp. And then we have the type, which is just a fully qualified domain name of the event class. It helps the deserializer know which class to run the deserialize method on. So that's that done. And from this point, we're pretty much ready to start coding, building our first aggregate, our cable aggregate, as that's the core of the business of you need a cable. So I think in the next screencast we'll try and cover that. I'm just about to publish this to GitHub, and you will find it on the SmoothPHP organization page, just called You Need a Cable. Feel free to sort of have a look around. This is one of my first screencasts. I've done a few before, but this is the first one I'm sort of really interested in. So any feedback would be great, any comments or any sort of advice as to how to record this. I'm not particularly good at editing video, so we'll soon see how that comes out. So thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you soon with the next screencast on building an aggregate.